The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to our webinar today on application modernization on the IBM I. I'm Mike Mahan, the sales director for Lansa. Also joining today is Eugene King. He has over 25 years experience with Lansa tools, and he'll be doing the driving today on our modernization journey. So what we'd like to do is to cover really three areas. So we'll talk about refacing. So putting a different front end on the IBM I. Repurposing, which is really about adding value to the individual users. So sort of extending what you want to do in your modernization process. And then finally, as I said, extending into adding additional applications to the IBM I. So we'll finish with a question and answer session at the end. So please do answer your questions as you go. So we all know the IBM I is an incredibly reliable, very stable platform. It takes very few people to maintain relative to other systems. But really, this is what everyone thinks the IBM I is. And in reality, the IBM I is much more. So the IBM I can be a portal front end, it can be mobile applications, responsive mobile applications, and it can be web-based interfaces, things that people are really used to seeing. So what I want to do is cover a couple of concepts before Eugene gets started. So next slide, Eugene. So there are different concepts out there. So no code is really all about someone who doesn't know anything about coding being able to generate an application. It's all about drag and drop. The issue with this is you have to wait for the developer of the no-code solution to add any functionality. Low code enables you to use some similar techniques, but also add functionality, but not within the same development environment. What Lansa really does is a hybrid low code. So taking advantage of no code and low code, which you're going to see primarily today, but also within the same development environment, the ability to create additional integrations, more enterprise grade applications, again, within the same development environment. We're going to be focusing primarily on the left-hand side of this chart for the conversation today. But I did want to make you aware that there's much more that can be done. We do have other webinars around integrations and more detailed development that we have recorded as well. So with that, I'm going to let Eugene take over the presentation and start us on our journey today.
So thank you very much, Mike. So what I really want to do is just give you an overview of the different tools that we're going to be looking at with regards to the modernization of your applications. And there's really three different tools that we need to look at. The first is our refacing engine. Now, I will be looking at each of these in turn, so we'll be drilling down as we go through the actual presentation. So the first is Axes. This is a refacing engine. This is actually how we web enable your applications very, very quickly. We'll see this in the first demonstration. The second is our flagship product. This is Visual Lansa. This is where, as a Lansa developer, I will spend most of my time. This is where I develop my applications. And again, we'll drill down more on that later. So we've got these two products. And then we have another product which allows us to connect the two together. So we can take your refaced 5250 screens and we can reuse them inside a modern web application. And we'll see that in action in a second. So first of all, I want to focus on Axes. So this is the refacing tool. So when we take a look at a typical 5250 screen, what we can do is we install Axes on your box, and you can go onto our website now, download Axes, install it on your IBM I, and instantly you'll have web access to your 5250 screens. We do not change your application anyway. You don't need to change the DDS. You don't even need the DDS. We actually work on the 5250 data stream. We convert that into HTML on the fly. So out of the box, you get this web-enabled web application. And then using our developers tool, we can then start adding rules around that on how things are displayed. And again, we'll see this in action when we get into the demonstration. And you can further enhance screens. So you can look at specific screens. So normally when we look at these sort of modernization approaches, we really analyze where users spend their time. And we use the 80-20 rule. Users will spend 80% of their time in 20% of the screens. And it's these screens where we want to add value. And I'll show you examples of that. Now on the development side, again, it runs in the browser. So runs directly off the IBM. I can go in and I can set up global rules. So this applies to the entire application. This can be making your menu items clickable. A date box, if it's a date field, that it has a prompt. If it's a set of radio buttons, I can visualize that as a set of radio buttons or checkboxes. So I can set them up globally so it applies across the entire application. And in the first spin, that's normally what we do, is that we set up these global rules to get a good looking application. We can go down to a screen level and we have this WYSIWYG. So this is what you see is what you get. You can drag and drop, you can add extensions onto that screen. You can even run this in a mobile device, and we have extensions that allow you to integrate to the camera to be able to take signatures, to use the GPS of the mobile device. And we have all of those out of the box available to you. Now, we're not going to have time today to look at the development side. You know, we can always have another session where we can dive deeper in and show you how that works. What I really want to do is to show you the stages of the modernization. And to do that, I'm going to start off with, let me pull up my green screen application, bear with me. So this is my browser application, not my browser application, my green screen. So I'm using IBM iTerminal emulator to connect to my IBM I. So I'm located in just north of London in the UK, and my IBM I is located in Houston, Texas. So I'm going to sign in. Let's make sure I've got the right password. There we go. And these are just your typical screens. So I've got a menu system set up so I can navigate around the menus. I get to an application area. So this, for the demonstration, I tend to use a application for a fictitious company called the Lansa tool company, and they sell tools online. But what I'm looking at in this session is actually the back office style functionality. So we're going to start with work with customers and have a look there. We've got a subfile with a position 2, press enter. I can then tab down to look at the details. And again, I'm just trying to show you what these screens look like as they run natively on the IBM I. With a prompt, let's have a look at one more screen, do a 2. Let's have a look at the address information. So we can see the address information. So it's just your standard 5250 screens. So I'm going to hop over to my browser now. I'm going to go to the first installation. So this is essentially Axes as installed. I've done nothing with the system. I'm going to sign in using my IBM I profile. Start my Axes session. Okay, so it's on a bit of a go slow today. Bear with me for a second. So we'll just wait for that to respond. So let me just check my connection. Yep. Okay, right. Let me try that again. Okay, that's better. Sorry, my connection had dropped on that one. Okay, so this is the screen as is out of the box. I press enter. You'll notice that the function keys that were at the bottom are now buttons that are clickable. Each of the menu options are now hyperlinked. So if I mouse over, you can see that the cursor changes to a little finger pointing icon. I can go into the demonstration. Lansa Tool Company. So again, I'm just using the same application, but now I'm driving it with a mouse. The position 2 is still there, so I can still type that in, Lansa. Positions to Lansa mark. Now this is where we see the first bit of added functionality here, which has been automatically rendered, which is the subfile options. You'll notice that the subfile options no longer appear at the top. They've been converted into a drop-down for the select. So if I do a left click or a right click, I can see what those subfile options are. I can go to details. We can see the details. Press an F4. There's my default pop-up box. Press enter. F12 from there to go to the next one. Go to address information. So it makes it easier to navigate around the entire application. So what I can then do is start looking at where I can add enhancements. For example, if I go into the details, I don't necessarily want to see a prompt box there. What I can do is I can add a drop-down. So I can look at these various areas and look how can I add value to that. So what I'm going to show you next is a global where I've applied rules that apply to the entire application. So here you can see that I've created my own login page. And so this is custom, and I've actually centralized things, the actual screen, into the middle of the actual page rather than it being left adjusted. So once again, I'm going to sign on. You'll notice now that I've got a logo up in the top right-hand corner. The buttons have now been rendered differently, so I've applied a different style to that, and the font is a slightly different style. Press enter. I've actually included the menu numbers now, so out of the box we don't get them, but I've just added a global rule that says, right, when you see a menu item, make sure you add that number as well. But if your users are still used to using the numbers, they can still use the numbers, and the numbers are visible to you. So I can just type in, press enter, and off we go. And I can even press F12 to go back. So back into the Lansa Tool Company, back to work with customers. Now you'll notice again, I've got rid of the top bar. So that was a global rule. I've changed the input fields now so that they look more like web input fields rather than an IBM screens input fields. If I press F6, which is the add, so this is adding a customer. Everything that you see on this page is all added globally. The drop downs to the bill states and the ship states are globally added. So anywhere I see the ship state and the bill state, I will get a drop down. The bill ship same address is a checkbox. Online status as well. And the discount code is now a drop down box. We can see that as well. If I do an F12 out of there, go into the details, we'll see the exact same drop down box. I've only applied the rule once, and it applies to everything for all the screens in the system. I've hyperlinked the URL. So I've detected that that's a web address. And as it's a web address, I've web enabled it. So if I click that, it'll open up another web page for Hasten on web. I can press enter on that one to go back, and we can look at the address information. And again, it's the same process. These are all global rules that have been used to render the screen slightly differently. So if I go into the web, again, global rules have been used here. I can even hyperlink the email address to open up my email client automatically and send it and open, and so I can send an email. I'm going to save changes to that one. So I can do all of those on a global basis. So I've not gone into any screens here, and I've not done any changes. So the next stage is the 80-20 rule, is to identify the 20% of the screens where users spend all their time. I'm just going to log in now. Again, you'll see that I've done some changes to this. I've customized it a little bit more. I've removed the menu numbers for this one. I didn't want them on this one. But I've added some buttons. So here, I can add common functionality. For example, I can go to the subsystems. I can look at the integrated file system. Okay? So I've added that functionality to the screen. I can also record macros. So this macro is essentially recording the keystrokes necessary to go to somewhere in my application. So if there's somewhere like work with customers that I go to on a regular basis, I just press work with customers, and you'll see that it navigates all the way through to my subfile. And that's what this one is here. It's still the same subfile, but I've customized it. I've removed the function keys in this case. I want it to look as webified as possible. I've got a back button rather than having to press F12. I can still press F12 and the function keys still work. I've just hidden. My subfile more is down here. So page up and page down with little tooltips are down at the actual bottom. I've customized this. The add customer is here. The subfile option, I've just created it as an image instead. So where you had the select box on your subfile, I've just put in an image, and I can click that image and I get the exact same subfile information, subfile options. So this is where, again, we see some additional added value. So here on the left-hand side are all the original fields that were on the 5250 screen. On the right-hand side is brand new functionality that accesses the database directly. So this order history is dependent on the customer that I actually select. So it's built dynamically. So if I was to go and select Lansa, for example, do a position 2, select, and go into details, I'll get a different set of orders. So now we've got 75 pages. I can take that and I can download it to Excel or CSV or PDF. Again, that's automatically built in. And this data comes directly from the database. I can also add chart controls. So here we see an example of using a chart to show the top 10 customers with mouse overs. Believe it or not, it's the same list. It's a similar list to what I've got with the order history. It's just a list of 2 values that I pass into the extension. Yeah, and that's what this is here. This is an extension. It's a chart extension. And this here is a data table extension, all part of the toolbox. If I now do an F12 to go back to the subfile and select address information, we can see another way we can add value. And adding value here is using Google Charts. So we can look at the address and we can then link it to a Google Maps. So we can see exactly where that is, whether it's billing and shipping. And we're pulling information directly from that 5250 screen and putting it into this extension, this control that allows me to see the Google Maps side of things. So these are the 3 different ways, these are the 3 different stages that you can take your Axes application through to. So when you initially install it, when you set up your global rules, and when you do screen customizations. Now, if we were looking at standard refacing tools, that is as far as you normally could take it. Yep, you'd be able to enhance the screen's look, you'd be able to add functionality around it, you'd be able to add some peripheral functionality like the downloads to Excel or the charts or map lookups, but you really can't change the nature of the application, the way that it behaves, the flow of the application. Now with Lansa, this is just your first step. Yep. We can take it further. You could decide to stop there. Yep. Just use Axes, put a web front end on it, customize it, add value, and give that to your users. Yeah, the users will have instant web access to the system. But we can take it further than that. So if we go back to the picture that we saw previously, we've seen Axes. Now what I want to quickly do is have a look at Visual Lansa. What is Visual Lansa? So Lansa actually started back in 1987, and it was developed by programmers to speed up the development process. The way they did that is that they looked at what the project that they were working on. In this case, it was a project in Australia for Colgate-Palmolive, and said, right, what can we take out of the main programs and make it simpler? and they said, right, anything that's used more than once. So whether that's logic, we can take that out of the core program and put it into one central location. Whether that is a table definition, we can take that out and put it in one central location. Fields that are used. All of these are objects that are used more than once. We put them in our central repository. We also take out things like validation rules. So normally where you would have those in the program or as constraints within inside your database, we put them inside our repository. Now we have an advantage with that, is that it gives us our database agnostic capability. A table, a file, it doesn't really matter. It's still the same type of object to a Lansa user, whether it's on a DB2400 or whether it's on MySQL or whether it's Oracle DB. It doesn't matter. A table is a table is a table. Now, to take advantage of that central repository, we created our own high-level language. This high-level language will generate the code necessary to run the type of application that you're creating. So whether that is an IBM procedural application, what we call functions, where we generate RPGILE, or where we create a web application, where we generate all the HTML and JavaScript and CSS for the client, and the C and C++ for the server side, and we connect them both together. It's all done with that single language. You could do Windows desktops, you could do native mobile, you could publish and consume REST APIs, all with that one particular language. And because we have that high-level language, we're not restricted to one particular platform. So we can deploy our application, so you can develop on an IBM and you can deploy that to the cloud somewhere, whether that's Azure or AWS. You can deploy it to a Windows server. It doesn't really matter. So as a Lansa developer, we're platform agnostic. We're also database agnostic. And that is what we build our modernization strategy on. And a key part of that is our Visual Lansa framework. So this is what we're going to be seeing in the next part of the actual demonstration, is this Visual Lansa frameworks in action. So with Lansa, we have two approaches to developing web applications. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. Two ways. We do mobile first, or we do back office first. Mobile first, we start with the lowest real estate and design out. Back office first, we start with a maximum real estate and we parse it down. So in this session, I'm going to be looking at the back office first because it fits in with that modernization and repurposing and extending your 5250 applications. The mobile first, we can just generate against your existing system, and we can extend it out to mobile devices, whether that's mobile phones or laptops. So there's two different approaches. We're going to focus on the back office style. And the frameworks is exactly as it says, and we'll see this in action when I do some prototyping. It allows us to build these back office style systems very, very quickly. And we also have the equivalent to the mobile first as well. So that was Visual Lansa. Now, one of our customers a couple of years ago actually asked the question. I've got many man years invested in my ERP system. I like Visual Lansa. I love Visual Lansa and the fact that it's so flexible. But how can I use the two together? Yeah, how can I take those 5250 screens and use them within inside Visual Lansa? So we came up with a tool called RAMP, and that stands for Rapid Application Modernization Process. It's a tool that allows us to leverage what you've done in Axes within inside a modern web application. So what exactly does it do? So let's look at your typical 5250 application and the process. So as an end user, I would sign on to the system, navigate through my menu systems as you saw me do for the Axes demo. Finally, I get to the screen where I do work. And this is the important screen. The other screens just happen to be necessary to get to where I need to do that work. We call those in the Visual Lansa world as junctions. And this main screen where we want to do work is a destination. And that's the screen we actually want. This is the one that we want to use inside our new application. So if we take the VLF, the Visual Lansa Framework application, what you're actually seeing here is a 5250 screen. And we plug that in. RAMP will handle all the navigation in the background to the actual screen and display the axes reface screen in the system on the actual web page. So now to the next demonstration. So in this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you an example application. And that's going to be built using Visual Lansa, VLF, so it's using the application framework, back office application, and RAMP. I'll show you first of all how you can embed axes sessions within inside this web application. And then I'll show you how we've repurposed some of these screens. Yeah, and we can repurpose them in many different ways. And I'll show you two techniques. And finally, I'm going to add some brand new functionality using our prototyping tool and using the various wizards that we have with the actual product. So I'm going to jump across to my development environment. So this is the Lansa IDE. So as a Lansa developer, this is where I will spend all my time. Now, again, I'm not going to focus too much on this, just to say that all the objects I work with, whether they're tables, whether they're web pages, windows, IBM applications, are all worked from within inside this environment. I have a connection to my repository on the IBM, but I can disconnect and completely work in isolation. Yeah, to be able to test my applications. So actually what I wanted to do first is show you the completed application, show you the application running. So that's a quick intro. We'll get back to that in a second. And I want to go into this one here. So this is the Lansa Tool Company RAMP. So this is the Visual Lansa Framework app. Once it connects, okay, then I'll log in. Again, I'm using the same profile, the IBM profile. I'm logging into this one. Now, the way that I'm running my application here is my master server is the IBM in Houston, and I'm running actually my application locally on my machine. Yep, so everything you see running, unless I'm accessing data or axes screens, are running locally. So I can have like a hybrid solution to this. I could run this on a Windows server connecting to the IBM back office systems. So this is the initial dashboard that I'm greeted with as part of the VLF. I added this using one of our wizards, just to give you an example of the sort of management dashboards you can actually create using Visual Lansa. I'll go to the menu here. I've got a sliding menu, and I've got an option called IBM. And initially, I'm going to just show you how we're opening up two IBM sessions. So all I've got here are essentially iframes, which I'm now going to log into using the profile that I signed on to the VLF and to start up my axes sessions. Now, these are exactly the same systems. All I have is a different skin over the top of them. So you'll see the one on the right-hand side has been completely customized, but it's the same screen. These are the exact same screens. I'm just using a different skin over the top with different added functionality. So we can embed those within inside. So it makes it simpler, and I don't have to sign on to multiple sessions for that. And again, I'm in the browser. But what I wanted to show you was here in sales order processing, into customers, and we can see our first customer. Okay, so this is essentially new functionality. I am replacing the subfile that you saw. I'm replacing it with brand new functionality. So when I select one of these objects from the list, this is where RAMP comes in. So we haven't seen RAMP in action yet. Yeah, we've seen axes embedded in the framework, but now we're seeing RAMP embedded in the framework, because now when I select that customer, it logs onto the system, navigates through the menu options, goes to the correct entry in the subfile, and shows me the subfile entry. So that once again, if I select it, it goes back to the subfile, reselects the entry, and then comes forward again to show the information. So you can see that it's very easy now to navigate around the system. So I've got address information. Again, this is what's available through Axis. So these are actually Axis screens. Web information. An order history. So these are the actual subfile options that you saw available when we're actually on the 5250 screen and in the Axis screens. But now RAMP is handling all the navigation around that system. I can add new functionality. So in this case, I've added notes and attachments. And I'll show you how simple that is to add when we get on to the next part of the demo. I can go into replacement parts, and I can see the notes. If we go into attachments, we can see that we've got a couple of attachments to that. But that is brand new functionality. We now have the new functionality sitting alongside the old functionality. Now, we can also reface those screens with a web page. So here we have what we call a details and a wrapper. We call them wrappers. Essentially what we have is a Lansa web page. So we've created that using Visual Lansa, and we use the ramp tool to get the values from the screen. So everything in the top part of this screen comes directly from the 5250 screen. Everything in the bottom half is brand new functionality that I've created using Visual Lansa to show the order history and the order details. So as I select an order line, it'll then go off and show the order history and the order details of that. So I've got the new functionality sitting alongside the old. Now, as a developer, I have this icon here, which allows me to debug. So when I'm debugging or I'm having issues, I can use this to create trace files for me to look at. But I can also say, show my hidden 5250 form. Actually, go back to the screen wrapper. So that is the actual wrapper for that. We can do other things with this as well using RAMP. So I've got one here. So work with orders. So here, all I'm doing, I'm going to close this down so I can actually see more. Oh, just close the wrong thing down there. Close that down. So what we're going to do here is actually start up another 5250 session. I'm too quick on my mouse. There we go. So all I'm doing here is what we call an unmanaged session. So this allows me to take a set of screens that are in a process and package them up. So in this case, it's work with orders, but it allows me to do an add and create. So I can do, let's do one for Lansa, press enter, go in here. So that's just the address information. I can go do an F4, select one of those, add an order. Let's have 100 of those. I can confirm it. So confirm and finally enter to confirm that. Enter to confirm, and we're then back to the beginning again. But what I've done essentially is just packed up that piece of functionality. I've done nothing else. I've ramped to this particular screen and nothing else. Now, as part of this process, I can then look at adding additional functionality. Let's say, for example, the users at the moment can look at the customer information, they can look at the order information, but what they can't do is they can't look at the product information without having to go back to here, IBM resources, going back to our session that we opened here, and having a look at the products. Oh, you see another advantage here. You'll see that I can jump between my areas and it'll remember exactly where I was previously. Okay, so I can then jump back to customer, so I can check the stock levels. I can then go back to the customer, and I can then say, not customer, let's go orders. That's where I was at. I can jump straight back to the orders, and I can then start entering the orders from there. But I want to be able to do that from this screen. Okay, so at the moment, I'm just going to close that down. So at the moment, in this here, I can see customers. I can do work with orders. But I now want to see some new functionality. I want to see products. I want to see the product information. This is where I'm going to show you how we can build that functionality, how quickly we can do that. I'm going to go to my development environment. So this is where I started. So this is where we develop everything. And again, we could spend an entire hour going through the capabilities of this environment. But for now, I'm going to go into my tools. And I'm going to go into the Visual Lansa Developers Workbench. So this is how we build the back office style applications. I'm going to use that ramp framework. So this is how we build the application flow, and it's also how we can go ahead and do some prototyping. Yep, so when we're adding a new piece of functionality, we may want to prototype it first. So here I can see the different application areas. There's my business objects, customers and work with, administration, IBM, and there's my sessions and some other screens that I've actually created. Well, I want to add products to my sales order processing. To do that, I'm going to go into my instant prototyping assistant, and then I get asked a series of questions. What is the object that you want to work with? Well, I'm going to work with the product. I can add more. I'm going to make that a little bit darker green. I can add more. If I just put comma there, I can then say, well, what else do you want to put? Well, I can say departments. Like that, okay? So I could put multiple business objects there. I'm just going to stay with product. Okay. Now, what do we want to see about that product? Well, we might want to see details. Okay, we might want to see an image. We might want to see location. Okay, so we can add any number of different tabs, and each one of these will be one of the tabs at top of the screen. So I can drag and drop that across and then go next. Which area do you want to assign it to? Well, I'm going to assign it to sales order processing. Drag and drop there. Job done. Gives me a summary of what we're going to be creating. So in this case, we're just adding one business object. I'm going to finish. And now it'll generate the prototype for me. So it'll save that in the background and then restart. So it picks up those changes. Once it's restarted. So now this prototype, I could actually share with other users by just giving them the URL. But before I actually share it, I want to add some notes to this. So if I go into the application area, go into sales order processing, business objects, products, I can go in and I can add some prototyping. Yeah, I can add images and I can add notes to it. In fact, first thing I want to do is just add a quick image. Rather than use the default image, I'm going to use one of our supplied images. Let's have that one there. That'll do. Okay. And then I'm going to do some prototyping. Let's say as a business analyst or a developer, I'm sitting with the users and I want to make notes of the types of applications that I want to create. Well, I can make the notes here. So this, so if I can clear that, this becomes a working specification document. I give some room. I can go and I can have images. So we've got images there. So let's have a look. So I'm prototyping the filter. So let me just drag and drop that onto there. So this is just images at the moment. I haven't actually created anything other than just application flow and adding images to it. Likewise with the details. I can clear all the content. I can add any notes that I want to regarding that. So I can be sat next to the users, making these notes and making the mock-up, screen mock-ups. So there we go. I've added some more. I've added another image. Just like that. And that's it. Right. Now I'm happy with that. I'm going to do a quick save. And then I'm going to execute it. Okay, so I'm going to execute it in Firefox. That's fine. Execute it in developer mode. Run it locally. Okay. So this is just the prototype. So once they've seen that, I can go in. Go to the menu option. Go to sales order processing. Go to product. So remember, this is just the prototype, so there's nothing functioning yet. Search for the product, do a select, We can see the products, we can see images, and we can see location. Yep, so they're the three tabs that we actually created. And there we only prototyped for one. If that product gets validated, we can go start adding functionality. So once again, once I want to start doing that, I come onto this tab here, the number 1 tab, and this is where I can start creating the functionality. The first one is, well, what do you want to display in the search list? Well, the file I'm going to be using is LTC prod. I just enter the values like that. And then I can just drag and drop each of those in there. Let's change that to the label first. I can drag and drop each one of those that I want to see in there into the actual drop down. So I'm going to go for category, department code, and category code, just like that. Okay. I can then decide, well, because the VLF is responsive, I can just do a left click and I can decide when each of these are viewed. We'll just change this one to stock and say, well, stock levels I want to see, description, actually I don't. I'm going to change order for that one. I'm going to have that product ID there. Description, let's have description after the stock. Description I don't want to see on a small screen. Retail price I do. Category and department I'll have there. And I'll turn those off as well. So if I'm on a small screen, I'll just see the product ID, the stock, and the retail price of that. Okay, that's it for the list. One final thing to do, uniquely identify using product ID. Finish. Right. That's what's going to be in the list. How am I going to do the search? So we have several options available for doing the search. I'm going to use this option here, which is search SQL over a table. And I can select the fields I want to do the search over. So product ID, I'm going to actually go with begins with. Product description, contains. And then when I come down here, I'm going to actually say equals. I'm going to keep those as they are. Department code and category code, I'm going to have as equal. Finish. Now, I have an option. Now, today we don't have time, but what I could do is go in and show you the editor and how it actually works in another session. But for now, all I'm going to do is just create. Now, this creates everything I need. It creates the front end, the client, which is the JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. It creates the back end, C++, and it glues them together. Yep, so I've now created both sides of the web application, the client and the server. Okay, that's done that part. Now, I'm going to create a details tab. I'm going to do a CRUD for that. So I'm going to go in here, do create, and create only. Again, it's doing the same thing. Now, the one thing about Visual Lansa is that every Visual Lansa developer is a full stack developer. It's one language that allows you to develop both the client and the server side. And the language looks a lot like RPG, CL, SQL structures, and the syntax is something similar. But what we generate underneath is dependent on where we want to deploy that application. Now, I'm just going to add notes because I can. And I'm going to add attachments. So these are inbuilt pieces of functionality that we found very useful in some of the projects that we've actually worked on. So we've given them as a freebie. So essentially, you just say, I'll have notes, and I'll have attachments, and there we go. Right, that's it. I'm going to save that. So yes. And now I'm going to execute. So what we should see is now the prototype is evolved into the completed application. Log in. Go to the menu. Select from the menu. There we go. Sales order processing. Product. And we should see the new, I must not, I didn't select them. Okay, we should see the new search. When I built the filter, I forgot to select the the category and department. Okay, doesn't matter, still works. We can go back and change that when necessary. We're not restricted to what's been generated. So now when I do the search, we get the search. I can download that directly to Excel. Yep, so that can now be downloaded. I've downloaded that list directly to Excel. I can select an entry. Where am I? Why is that? Oh, sorry, I'm on the prototype. Okay, when I select an entry, we'll then see the details. Okay, so we'll see the details of the product come up. There we go. So now what we've done is we've evolved the prototype into a running application, complete with attachments, functionality, and notes. So I can go in, I can add notes to the application, I can add attachments now to the product, and we can do our search. So I can quickly check what the stock quantity is just by opening that list. So I can go now into my customer here, and we can have a look at orders, order history, and we can cross-reference everything at the same time. Okay. So that will then open up the customer. I can then do a search for that, bring up the details. Okay, and then once I press that, it then activates the ramp tool set, and it will navigate to the actual detail. We've gone from a 5250 screen, web enabling that using axes, straight out of the box. The install takes between 15-20 minutes, depending on the speed of your box. Once you've done that, you're able to access those screens via the web. You can customize those screens using a set of global rules. So you can change the font, the background colors, add logos, drop downs, checkboxes, date controls, even different colors, backgrounds. You can then identify the screens that you want to add value to. And using the Axes development tool, you can add that functionality. Again, all running off the IBM I. And if you want to take it further, you can take those Axes screens and repurpose those within inside a modern web application, where the ramp tools will actually control the navigation around your system. When we design these sort of systems, it's really important that you think about how you want your application to run, not how it currently runs. So in an ideal world, what would you like your application to do? So this is where we do the prototyping first. Once we've done the prototyping, then we look at where we can use ramp to plug in your 5250 screens, and then where we may want to create new functionality. Yep, so we analyze it that way, and we may even use wrappers. Yep, so Visual Lansa web pages sitting on top of Axes screens, pulling that information, and we can then enhance that accordingly. Okay, so at that point, that concludes the presentation and the demonstration portion. So I'll hand back to Mike to see if we have any questions.
So the initial one was actually more of a comment or a request than a question, and it has to do with our focus or our support of the AS400 or IBM I series machines. And I guess in answer to that, I would say I always try and promote the I, which and the benefits. I think we're in some respects we're a victim of our own success. So when you look at the green screen, if you understand the command level, it can be faster. And so we tend to gravitate towards that. So when we're really well trained, we focus on the green screen and tend to not move forward to different technologies. The I series clearly has the benefit of stability, longevity, and definitely try and promote that when I am doing presentations. So as we move forward, we need to leverage or point out that there are other options for the eye, as we've tried to show in our roadmap or our travels to modernization. Next question has to do, well, so it's kind of generic. How much training is required? So we've got a lot of, so we have really two different technologies here. So I guess, Eugene, if you could tackle it from an axis perspective, so just refacing, and then sort of moving forward to enhancing. Maybe to answer it in two different ways.
Okay, so with regards to training, as Mike said, it's in two parts. So first of all, axes. Axes, when you install it on the IBM I, you will have access to the tutorials, and they're fairly simple tutorials that take you through. And we're looking at a couple of days, 2 to 3 days of time actually going through those tutorials, and those tutorials will give you all the skills necessary to be able to do the customizations that you saw me go through in that part of the actual demo. Now, the visual Lansa side of things is a little bit more complicated because we're talking about a full development tool. So this, you can develop any type of application. So what we mainly focus on is initially the fundamentals. So we have e-learning available. So this is an online training courses, tutorials, which are for free, you can sign up for, that will take you through the fundamentals, and that's normally about 4 to 5 days. And then depending on the type of application you want to create initially, again, it'll be another 4, maybe 5 days. So if you want to focus on web side of things after the fundamentals, again, that's 4 or 5 days. If you want to do REST APIs, publishing consumption, that's maybe 1 or 2 days of training. So again, it depends on your requirements. But if you're looking at the web solution, you're looking at about 8 to 10 days of training time.
Okay. I guess kind of related to that, I'm an RPG programmer. Do I need to learn Java and C to use this?
No, I myself, I'm an RPG programmer. Way back when I joined Lansa, so my background is RPG. I've been developing with Lansa for 25 years. I've only ever used the visual Lansa language. You only need one language. Lansa handles any technology changes underneath. So when the switches were made, Lansa handled it. When you start to deal with HTML5 and CSS3, Lansa handled that. I kept programming the way that I've been programming since 97 when I first joined the company. So no, it's only one language all the time. This is why we say Lansa developers are full stack developers. They only need the one skill set.
Okay. And I think we've got time for one more. This one's a little bit more specific. I've got 1,500 screens. How long does it take to modernize that?
Well, how long is a piece of string? So you don't necessarily have to modernize every screen. As I mentioned previously, install axes, and I'm running through a couple of evaluations at the moment. And the first stage is install axes, get it up and running, see what your screens look like. Once you've done that, if you're CUA compliant, there's probably not much you need to change. Then you may want to start looking at how you can add functionality like the drop downs and the radio buttons by adding global rules. You can even use global rules to tidy up something on a screen that's gone amiss. Yeah? Then once you've looked at the global rules, then this is where the 80-20 rule comes in. Users spend 80% of the time and 20% of the screens. Look at those screens and look at where you can add value to those screens. So again, you don't have to go in straight away. You just install axes and you're off and running. And then on a screen, then we can look at how we can add and really tidy up various screens and global rules.
So we're running up against the end of the hour. I will try and tackle the additional questions by sending to you directly. So thanks everyone for your attention today, and we look forward to working with you in the near future. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.